I'd like to welcome you to the regular meeting of the Land Use and Economic Development Committee. My name is Supervisor Malia Cohen. I'm the chair of this committee, and to my right is Supervisor Scott Weiner, the vice chair, and to my left is Supervisor Jane Kim. Our lovely clerk is Miss Andrea Osbury. I also would like to recognize Jesse Larson and Jonathan Gumwalk, who will be broadcasting this meeting on SFGov TV. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes. Please silence all electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and any copies of documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today may appear on the March 10, 2015 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Great. Thank you very much. My apologies for starting a little bit late, ladies and gentlemen, but let's go ahead and get started. Please call item number 1.
Item number 1 is a resolution imposing interim zoning controls for building permits for commercial uses for a 12-month period.
Thank you. Colleagues, we heard this item at our meeting last week, and the amendments made required us to consider it again today. I think Supervisor Kim has some comments today for item number 1. Please.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Thank you, colleagues, again for your co-sponsorship of these interim controls last Monday. I really appreciate both of your support. I actually want to offer some non-substantive amendments to the findings that I will submit to the clerk that emphasizes the evidence that pre-existing office spaces have been converted without the benefit of a permit to residential use in multiple buildings on Market Street in the south of Market, and actually we're learning throughout the city. And so for your information, I have these amendments before us. Mr. City Attorney, do I read all of them into the record, or was my summary?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner, because we don't have a written copy, I would suggest actually reading them into the record.
Great. So I'm suggesting amendment of 4 whereas clauses. Whereas the board is aware that during the economic downturn, renting commercial space for unpermitted residential use was an attractive economic option for many property owners, but the economic situation has changed rapidly and office use in the area is now in demand. And whereas the unpermitted residential spaces have become an important source of housing for residents of the city and preserving the city's housing stock, particularly its relatively affordable housing stock in a climate of scarce housing resources and relative lack of affordability is of paramount concern. And whereas on December 18, 2013, in Executive Director 13-01, Mayor Ed Lee requested city departments to make recommendations to, among other things, preserve and promote rental housing and to hold public hearings when a loss of housing is proposed. And whereas the city strictly controls the change of legal uses through the Planning and Building Code, but a change of use in a building that contains unpermitted uses does not afford the public and decision makers the same level of notice and opportunity to consider the impact of such a... And
the copy that I have of such a change in use when surrounding circumstances may have substantially changed.
Thank you. Sorry, I think my office only gave me 1 page, and it overwent that page, and I didn't have the rest of it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
These amendments are non-substantive, and I will make a motion to make this amendment after public comment. And that concludes my comments.
Thank you very much. Let's move into public comment. I've got a few public comment cards here for item number 1. I'm going to call 4 or 5 names up, and if you don't hear your name but you'd like to speak on the item, please come to this podium to my left. First up will be Chris Baker, David Lucy, Naomi Ann Cooper, Cash, and Tommy. Just as a reminder, you each will get 2 minutes. All right, let's go. Chris. Please line up on this side of the chamber.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a tenant in the mid-market area. I've lived in a rent-controlled unit for the last 13 years, and I would encourage you to move this forward, do whatever we can to sort of hit pause on this massive happening, not just in my building, not just in my immediate region in the mid-market area, but all over the city. Spaces, residential rent-controlled spaces, which the city has a stated desire to maintain, being converted into office use. We need to put a pause on it while we we study it, while we figure the extent of what's happening, and I thank you very much for renewing these interim controls. I encourage everyone to vote yes.
Could you clarify if you live in 1049 Market?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Next speaker. Please queue up. Let's go.
Hi, my name is Naomi Ann Cooper. I live at 1049 Market Street for 17 years. I'm a retired teacher on a fixed income. I'd hope to substitute here so I could just get by. And it would really affect my life very badly to move out of San Francisco. Many of the tenants in our building are low income, disabled, artists. There's a variety of people, but many of us really need the housing, and we really urge you to please put these controls in place, because we're worried about our own situation and also about San Francisco losing its diversity, especially the school system is being kind of gutted because so many teachers can't afford to live here anymore. So please help us and the other people in San Francisco to have affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Carl Haas. I have been a tenant at 1049 Market for over 8 years. I'm a small business owner. I'm seeing what has happened to the city firsthand because I'm facing losing my place, but more so, I'm seeing the inability to find employees, because people at the level that I hire at can just get jobs outside the city. They're not going to commute in. If I can't find people to work for me, I'll have to close my business. So please protect this kind of alternative housing, which is where my people live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, I'm David Lucy, and I'm speaking on behalf of all these people behind me. We all live at 1061 Market. Our landlord is Jennifer Chen, and yeah, we've been living there since 2012, and right now, like, we're in the same situation where we're getting threatened to get, potentially evicted, and our floor being turned into, a commercial space, and that's what happened to the second floor. We had about 20 artists getting displaced. It was the same situation as our floor, which is the third floor, and yeah, we've all been there since 2012, and if we get displaced from where we live now, then we won't be living in the city anymore. So we hope that you guys pass the bill so we can stay in the city and continue to live here and everything. So thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Tommy Avicoli-Mecca. I'm the Director of Counseling Programs at the Housing Rights Committee. As you just heard from the last speakers who were up, this situation, the problem that you're trying to, that Supervisor Kim is trying to address with the legislation, goes beyond 1049 Market. Those folks are from 1061 Market. I know of buildings on Brannan Street, on Folsom. At the Housing Rights Committee, we get complaints from a number of buildings in the mid-market area. The same situation, commercial space has been used residentially for a long time, and then suddenly now, because it's more lucrative to rent commercially in that area, the landlords want to evict all the tenants. They're usually rent-controlled units. We can't afford to lose them. It's ironic that I just came from a press conference at 16th and Mission, a collective there called Station 40, which is a collective of tenants. They've been there 12 years. They're being evicted. They just received unlawful detainers. Their space is commercial, but they've lived there for 12 years. The landlord knew when they took over that space that these tenants were living there, that it was a commercial space, but when these landlords took over the place, it was much more lucrative at 16th and Mission to rent residentially than it was to rent commercially. But now the tide has changed. The tables have turned. It is now more valuable to do commercial rents at 16th and Mission, especially with all the condos going up. So, of course, the landlords want to evict the tenants, but these are tenants that have been there for 12 years. They need to be protected. protected. The city needs to make a commitment to protect these tenants, so I hope you will pass this legislation to the full board for a vote with a positive recommendation. We have to preserve rent-controlled units at all costs. We have to save people's homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Hi. This bill just closes a really simple loophole that shouldn't have existed. 1049 Market has been through so many lawsuits, so much time, energy, stress, health problems, because someone was allowed to go to a counter and sign a piece of paper, and that's it. We didn't get to be told. We didn't have a right to comment. The public didn't have a right to comment. The city didn't get a right to consider whether this is in the best interest of the city. Closing this loophole simply means that the stakeholders who deserve to be considered get to be considered, and that includes the landlord, too. The landlord has spent so much money over this issue, and if these kinds of controls had been in place, this is about protecting other landlords from this kind of nightmare. The loophole shouldn't be there. Closing it helps everybody. There's been some sort of discussion last week about, why is this just targeted at a limited area? The reason is because this particular area is where the live-work lofts were created. This is where the concentration of them is. Each neighborhood has its own particular character, and this is part of the character of this neighborhood. The block that 1049, 1067, 1061 are on is literally the center of what's called the historic Market Street Theater and Loft District. It's on the National Historic Register. It has all of these loft buildings that were so important to San Francisco that we designated them as such. That block is the epicenter. The reason that you care about lofts in this area is because that's where they are, and we already cared about them. That's not new. It's just about protecting the people who live in that neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have two more speaker cards. Pat and Ryan, please come up. And if there are any other members of the public that'd like to speak on item 1, please come up.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Again, my name is Pat Buskovich. I was a structural engineer, worked on this building for 3 years for the previous owner. There are two issues that were the challenge to legalize it when I was hired to legalize it. One is light and ventilation. That was a San Francisco code change. I spent 2 years working with the DBI staff. They were very supportive of deleting this amendment to the San Francisco code, which would have made it a little easier to legalize this unit. The commission at that time twice decided not to delete it, and I hope you guys do delete that amendment. It has no business in San Francisco. The other requirement was egress. The state building code requires a second means of egress and egress from a bedroom window. And that is the challenge here, to be able to provide that, and that would require dramatic work on this building. The other thing that we need to be aware of is this building was designed for commercial. I have converted legally another commercial building that had the necessary egress windows. This building is landlocked on the two sides, and it poses a life safety risk, specifically space heaters. The city also should be aware the landlord is probably not covered for this use because his insurance is commercial, not residential. We also need to be upgrading police and fire for residential use at night in this district and to adjust transit and parking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Hello, Commissioners, Supervisors. My name is Ryan Patterson. I'm an attorney for the owners of the two properties targeted by this resolution, 1049 Market Street, LLC, and 1067 Market Street, LLC. I'd like to incorporate my previous comments from last week on this file, as well as those of the owner's representative and consultant who spoke. The 223 amendments that are included in this file today make this resolution even more retroactive, which is illegal as applied to a permit where rights have vested. Today's amendments, we object to the last-minute changes here that were not given to the public in writing, not posted. We do not have a clear understanding or an opportunity to evaluate these changes to determine whether they are substantive or not, or what their effect might be. The property owners have relied on the permits and on the city's representations here, and they have a vested right to complete work under the permit. Importantly, 60-day notices to quit the premises based thereon were served, and retroactively invalidating an underlying permit at this point could expose the property owners to substantial liability for pursuing evictions based on permits that were invalidated after the fact by this legislation. It's also unclear whether a finally issued permit would remain in effect during an application for conditional use authorization under the control's new provision that such a permit, quote, shall not remain effective unless the project sponsor obtains a conditional use authorization under Planning Code Section 303. There are far more problems with this proposal than can be even listed in 2 minutes. We believe this should be continued to a new hearing to address the new changes that were just added moments ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on item number 1? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, are there any further discussion? Okay, Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I apologize. There is one other piece of my non-substantive amendment that I did not articulate prior, and this is just under page 4, the further resolved, and this in line 21. Just adding subject to posted notice and the 15-day hold requirements above, and to read the rest of it, that during the pendency of these interim controls in the geographic area covered by these controls, any commercial use that has been converted in whole or in part to residential use without benefit of a permit shall be deemed abandoned. A permit subject to the posted notice and 15-day hold requirements above. So that is my stated set of amendments, and I just want to make a motion to amend.
Thank you. So you've made a motion to amend, and I guess we take a vote on the amendments.
Like a vote? Okay.
Is there also a motion to move to the...
I was going to do the motion to amend first. I don't know if there's been a second.
No, there hasn't. May I have a second for the motion to amend? All right. Motion made by Supervisor Kim, seconded by Supervisor Weiner. So this motion is amended. And what would you like me to do with it?
Now I'd like to make a motion to move this forward with positive recommendation as a committee report.
All right, that's wonderful. We've got a motion made, seconded. Seeing that there is no objection, this motion passes unanimously. The positive recommendation as a committee report. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 2?
Sure.
Thank you.
Item number 2 is ordinance amending the planning code to permit exceptions from dwelling unit density limits and other specified code requirements.
All right, thank you very much. Supervisor Weiner is the author of this item and will present and lead the discussion on item number 2.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for agendizing this piece of legislation today. And I also want to thank my co-sponsor on this legislation, President Breed. Colleagues, today is housing legislation that will, I think, be a win-win for San Francisco. In essence, providing that when a building is undergoing seismic retrofit, either mandatory or voluntary seismic retrofit, while they're at it, the property owner can add 1 or more in-law units into the building. This legislation will provide, therefore, an incentive to add new, accessible, typically moderate income housing without providing any public subsidy. It also will incentivize buildings to undergo seismic retrofits, and equally important, building upon the legislation I sponsored to allow new in-law units in the Castro neighborhood, it will provide a path for the creation of new rent-controlled units in San Francisco, since the legislation provides that if a unit is being added into an existing rent-controlled building, the new unit will also be rent-controlled. We typically like to say, or don't like to say, we typically do say that you can't create new rent-controlled units, but that's not the case, and this legislation will allow for the creation of new rent-controlled units. The legislation has the support of Mayor Lee, as well as SPUR, the Housing Action Coalition, Livable City, and recently received the unanimous support of the Planning Commission. We know that we're in the midst of a housing affordability crisis, and one of the reasons that we're in that crisis is that we have failed for decades to produce the number of housing units necessary to match population growth. We've been growing for more than a decade by, on average, 10,000 net new residents per year. Yet during that time period, on average, we've produced about 2,500 new housing units every year. Although our housing production is beginning to accelerate, which is a good thing, we have a long way to go to dig ourselves out of the crisis that we're in, where the average rent in many areas is $3,000 a month. In-law units are the most affordable type of non-subsidized housing. They tend to be smaller than other units. They're typically on the ground level. They are somewhat, they're less fancy frequently than other units. And they're also, in many buildings, more affordable than new construction to build, since there is already existing infrastructure in the building. In addition, in-law units are inherently decentralized. We typically have, or commonly have, disputes in the city around height and bulk and those types of impacts, while in-law units are built within the existing envelope of buildings, and they tend to be sprinkled throughout a neighborhood, so they're not all concentrated in one area. As I mentioned, they tend to be more affordable according to various studies, including from UC Berkeley, from HUD, and from AARP. I know that Ms. Hadadan from the Planning Department will describe the ordinance, but in short, the legislation allows properties to add additional accessory dwelling units or in-law units within the existing building envelope if they are participating in the city's established mandatory or voluntary seismic retrofit program, therefore creating an incentive to create new housing as well as an incentive to seismically retrofit buildings. We're continuing to work with the Department of Building Inspection on developing a set of what are known as equivalencies, basically standardized and pre-approved bulletins that will help people who are interested in adding in-law units but cannot meet certain provisions of the current building code given the age of the building. The legislation that we passed relating to Castro in-law units, as well as former Supervisor David Chu's in-law legalization program, require DBI to issue these bulletins, and I know the department is working on them. I want to thank the Planning Department staff for its terrific work on this legislation, building on the work that it did on the previous legislation. And I want to note that the Planning Commission did make several recommendations at its meeting, and I support all of those recommendations, and I've distributed written amendments, colleagues, and after public comment, I will ask the committee to make those amendments which are non-substantive and will not require a continuance. One of the amendments, similar to the Castro in-law legislation, will require monitoring of rents in these units and reporting, just so we can see how it's going in terms of the affordability of the units. And there are some other organizational and technical amendments. So colleagues, this is important legislation. While there is no one solution to our housing crisis, we have to try a lot of different things, and making our planning code more flexible with respect to in-law units is one of those things, and I ask for your support. So if there are no comments or questions on opening things up, I will turn it over to the Planning Department. Ms. Hadadan.
Thank you. Planning Department.
Good afternoon, Kimia Hadadan, Planning Department staff. As Supervisor Wiener described, this ordinance would allow addition of dwelling units beyond the existing density limits in buildings that are undergoing seismic retrofitting, either mandatory or voluntary. I'm just going to describe a little bit what this program is, the Soft Story program. After many years of analysis, the city adopted a mandatory program for property owners of certain buildings to seismically upgrade their buildings. These are buildings that have a condition called soft story, which is a structural weakness in a multi-story building because of large openings at the ground floor and lack of interior partition walls. And these soft story buildings are vulnerable to earthquake, and in case of an earthquake, these buildings can become inhabitable or may cause life loss for their residents. The buildings that are subject to this mandatory programs are buildings that are 3 or more stories or 2 stories over a basement. They include 5 or more dwelling units, and they were built before January 1st, 1978. And the proposed ordinance would provide another financial incentive for property owners to comply with the mandatory seismic retrofit program or voluntarily upgrade their buildings as well. There are some financial incentives currently existing for this program, but this ordinance would allow additional of a unit, and the revenue generated from potential renting out of this unit will help the property owner to offset their costs of seismic retrofitting and also the costs associated with building the unit. The units that will be added through this ordinance are called accessory dwelling units, or also known as secondary or in-law units. These are units that are subordinate to the compared to the other units in the building, and it's because of their location in the building. It's on the ground floor. It's usually lower ceiling heights. It may have a side entrance and maybe less light exposure, and also this ordinance restricts the size of these units to be limited by the existing footprint in the building, in the existing building, and therefore this creates this subordinate nature, and therefore these units are known to be affordable by design, because the physical and design constraints in lower rents compared to the regular new units currently being built. And as Supervisor Wiener mentioned, this is supported by many academic research, state, and also looking at the rental prices and rental listings on the websites. And the specifics of this ordinance is very similar to the Castro legislation before you a year ago that allowed similar units. It would require these units to be rent controlled if the existing building is rent controlled. It would also provide an administrative waiver for certain planning code requirements such as open space, rear yard, and parking. The Department and the Planning Commission supported this ordinance unanimously, as ADUs are a housing strategy that would first provide housing at a more affordable rate compared to the new market rate units that are being built right now in the market. And also, secondly, these units would serve as a financial incentive to property owners to seismically upgrade their buildings. An earthquake-proof housing stock would serve the city as a whole in saving lives and saving costs related to post-earthquake repair. Residents of these buildings would be able to stay in their housing post-earthquake, saving the city significantly in costs associated with finding temporary or new housing for earthquake victims. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. I'm here for any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Mr. Wiener, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, and if there are no comments or questions, I believe Supervisor Kim may have a...
Supervisor Kim? Sure. All right. We'll go ahead and go into public comment at this time. I've got 3 cards: Tom Radulovich, Buskovich, and Alyssa Keyes. Okay. Tom, why don't you come on up, and then Tim, you can just get in line.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Tom Radulovich, Executive Director of Livable City. Here to speak in favor of this ordinance. Adding new units to existing buildings and established residential neighborhoods is a great way to add housing in a way that conserves buildings and the building materials embodied in those, so it's very green. It also conserves neighborhood character. We always have this battle of, where do you put the new units and how is it going to affect the built character of the neighborhood? The great thing about this ordinance is these units will be in spaces that are already in these buildings but are currently disused. I won't go into great detail on all the reasons. They were explained very well by the supervisor and by the planning staff here, but we think it's an outstanding piece of legislation, a great way of adding new rent-controlled and rent-stabilized units in our city. We thought it was impossible to do, but it turns out it is indeed possible through things like in-law legalization, which we hope you supervisors will support in your districts, and this ordinance as well. And just say kudos to Director Wiener for bringing some great win-win housing legislation before this board. We really appreciate all that you're doing to help relieve our housing crisis. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Kias. I am here representing SPUR, and on behalf of SPUR, thank you for the opportunity to comment on the ordinance permitting the addition of new dwelling units in buildings.
Real quick, I'm sorry. Maybe you could speak into the microphone.
In buildings undergoing
yeah.
seismic retrofitting, SPUR has long advocated to make it easier to build or legalize accessory dwelling units. Creating ADUs helps more homes across the city in a way that does not change existing neighborhood character and has limited impact on neighborhood infrastructure. ADUs also provide a subsidy-free path to provide housing units that are typically affordable by design because of their size, location, and physical constraints. This ordinance provides an incentive for property owners to complete the earthquake safety retrofitting of existing housing and at the same time enables the addition of more housing to our city supply. This is a great opportunity to align and push forward multiple policy goals for the city. SPUR supports this ordinance and thanks Supervisor Wiener for his continued leadership on accessory dwelling units.
Thank you, Alyssa. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Tim Cullen on behalf of the Housing Action Coalition, and I also would like to commend Supervisor Wiener on this common sense legislation. It unites two vital policy interests of protecting our existing housing stock and building new housing that would be intrinsically affordable. Our understanding is that the next great earthquake is going to tear hell out of rent-controlled housing, and it's vitally important that we begin to upgrade these buildings, which are substantially older and less up to code than they should be. We also like that this legislation gives a clear financial incentive to undertake this work, which is pretty costly, but most importantly, from our point of view, is that it promotes a type of housing that we love, and that's smaller, cheaper, and should be located throughout the city. We have a strong policy interest in wanting to see this taken to all neighborhoods around San Francisco. As you heard, there's no single solution to our affordability crisis, but this is a sensible one that should be tried and should be put into use. We would not want to see any restrictions on this that would take away the incentive. We want as many folks coming forward, building owners coming forward to take advantage of this policy as absolutely possible. So I think it should go ahead just as it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
It's important to understand that the soft story program is a key to preserve affordable housing. The addition of accessory dwelling units will provide a financial incentive because within 4 years, the units will be paid for. So if you tie the soft story program with these units, you encourage property owners to do the work. My estimate, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 units will be added in this program. We do need to clean up a couple of issues in the building code, and I know you're working with the building department. Currently, the soft story program does not allow you to do anything other than soft story work, and you have to amend that such that they have to be tied together so that you're doing your seismic now to protect the units above to gain the benefit of a unit that within 4 years will be worth a couple $100,000 and paid for it. You also need to tweak a couple of things. You need to address the sprinkler requirements, particularly since there is going to be, or potentially going to be, a future sprinkler ordinance for apartment buildings. You're going to have to clean that up. And the other issue to make this cost effective is to deal with the heat to these units. That can be easily solved by solar heat tied into the building's electrical system, which will solve a number of your issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there? Oh, one more speaker, please. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Nick Lucy. I'm here in favor of this legislation as well. It's a very unique piece of legislation that both benefits landlords and tenants. I'm currently involved in 2 projects right now, where one follows the mandatory soft story retrofit, and the other one, the property owner is looking to do a voluntary soft-story retrofit. Works well for both of them because the additional unit is going to help offset the cost to do the mandatory retrofit, and for the voluntary one, it is going to compel the building owner to do these retrofits, which aren't necessarily required, but in the long run will help the building. Also works very well for tenants. It provides safe housing. It's going to be code compliant. It's not an additional unit that's just being pigeonholed into the building. The city will know about it. The city will know about the rents. And so I think it really works for all parties involved. And thank you very much for proposing this.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak on item number 2? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you. And I know Supervisor Kim has a question, but I just wanted to make a few comments. Thank you to members of the public who came out to support the legislation. Just a couple things. First of all, we have over a number of months received a number of expressions of interest from building owners who would like to utilize this legislation. And I want to thank the Department of Building Inspections for notifying members of the public that the legislation is in process. Of course, they can't guarantee that anything will pass, but so that people, if they want to utilize it, can wait a little bit and do so. In addition, Mr. Buskovich's points about the building code and other codes are important because we know that a project, even if it's within zoning, can get caught up with building code issues since a lot of these units cannot comply with 2015 building code and other codes. And that is why it is so important in terms of the work that DBI is doing to come up with equivalencies. I will note that a few months ago, the first unit under the Castro legislation came out of the planning department, was approved by planning, and we were very excited by that. It did initially get caught up at DBI in terms of code compliance, but that has since been resolved. So it's going to be a little bit of a process early on, but I'm confident that DBI will eventually iron out some of these issues, and we'll see a much smoother process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. And I just had a couple of questions, actually, just in relation to I thought they would be speaking at public comment, but the Council of Community Housing Organization that made some comments on the legislation. And there was really only 3 pieces that I picked up on. One, is there a monitoring piece to this legislation?
Through the chair, one of the amendments that we're offering today replicates the monitoring provision that we had put into the Castro legislation, periodic reporting or required reporting about the rents, just so we can get a sense of affordability. So that's, if we adopt the amendment today, that will be in there.
Great. I think that's important. I support us figuring out creative ways to add units to our housing stock. But I am very curious, not just with this legislation in particular, but whether all of our legislations around accessory dwelling units, whether it's past Supervisor Chu's legislation on in-law units or the one in the Castro, and this one, what impact that had on the rental market, and generally at what price point are they rented at? So what average median income has this actually been targeting in practice? The 2 other points that I was curious about, one, I wanted to understand a little bit, so I guess I did not catch the differences between Chu's legislation and Supervisor Weiner in relation to the Castro versus in-law units in general, and that is the subdivision and lot split prohibition. And so it's my understanding that under Supervisor Chu's legislation, if you did decide to opt into the legislation and legalize your accessory dwelling unit, you would then be prohibited from condoizing and selling it off as a separate unit. That was not done in the case of the Castro ordinance, which I did not realize. I guess I'm trying to understand kind of what type of units, what kind of buildings this legislation would impact, because I think Supervisor Chu's ordinance specifically addressed kind of single-family homes with an accessory dwelling unit. Will this cast a larger net than that?
Well, I can respond, and then maybe Ms. Hudadun can respond as well. Yes, this will definitely apply to multi-unit buildings. And in fact, when you look at buildings that are undergoing seismic retrofit, it is going to be overwhelmingly multi-unit buildings. The mandatory soft story retrofit applies to buildings of, I believe it's 5 or more units and 3 stories or higher. Although you could see a situation where a single family home would do seismic retrofit work, that's not going to be particularly common. So it will typically be multi-unit buildings.
I also have a map of which buildings this would apply to. I can put it on the...
That would be great. I saw it in the handout, but it was black and white in the handout that was given to the board committee, so it wasn't very clear to me.
GovTV, could we get the overhead, please? Thank you.
So will there be single-family homes that are caught within Supervisor Wiener's ordinance that is not caught by former President Chu's ordinance?
Well, the soft story program only applies to buildings that have 5 units or more, so it does not apply to single family.
Although, since this also applies to voluntary retrofits, you could have, say, a 3-unit, 2-story building that would be able to participate. This is both voluntary and mandatory, and retrofit is very specifically defined in the code elsewhere. So non-mandated buildings could participate as well.
Okay. Ideally, because we are because the impetus behind this legislation is to increase our rental housing stock, my general preference is, if we're going to create this incentive to do so, that unit remain a rental unit. But I understand the complication if you're talking about buildings of 5 units or more. I wonder, though, if there is a way to kind of siphon off, single-family homes that do seismic retrofitting. I just think it's important for there to be consistency, and some single-family homes under President Chu's legislation, former President Chu's legislation, are prohibited from condoizing, but then some are under this legislation. I just think there should be some clarity, and there should be kind of one set of rules for single-family homes.
So President Chu's legislation, I think there is a distinction in that when you look at the units that are covered by President Chu's legislation, those are existing, often very long-term existing units that typically have residents, often tenants, in them. What we're talking about here in the Castro legislation, as well as this one, is trying to incentivize owners to go through the many steps of actually building a brand new unit that doesn't exist. So it's not about just taking an existing unit and doing some things to get it up to code, which might be expensive but could actually be quite inexpensive depending on the unit. We're talking about taking space that is not a living unit, turning it into a living unit. And I guess my approach to this has been that the more restrictions that you put on what results, the less likely it is that anyone's even going to participate in it. And so when you look, especially at a single-family home, there are probably going to be very few that would go through a seismic retrofit. But let's say a single-family home where someone decides to turn their garage into a living unit. I'll be honest, I know I've spoken to a number of people who either have done this, sometimes illegally, or want to do this, that they will want to convert the lower unit so that they can live in that unit. Because they can't get up the stairs anymore, and then they want to either rent out or have a family member live in the upper unit. And so these situations are so varied that I am hesitant to say, if you do this and you go through the cost of doing it and the permitting process and so on and so forth, your reward is going to be that you're banned from the condo lottery. And so that was my thinking in terms of responding to the suggestion that came in around that.
Okay, we have some time before it goes to the full board. I do want to understand that issue a little bit better, but I do appreciate Supervisor Wiener's point. And so maybe I can sit down just to understand kind of the universe of buildings a little bit better. And again, I understand it for multi-unit buildings. I think it would be a very tough imposition for some of our multi-unit buildings. Again, I just want to think a little bit more about the balance of single-family homes and their ability to condoize kind of a small accessory dwelling unit and sell it on the market.
And through the chair, one thing that I should also mention is that this legislation does not apply to RH1 and RH1D zoning areas. And really the reason for that is that because there are so few single-family homes that will undergo seismic retrofit, it just didn't make sense to include those zoning areas. And so I suspect that very significant majority of single-family homes are not even within the areas that would be eligible for this zoning change.
Okay.
Thanks for mentioning that, because if there are any single-family units that want to actually go through seismic retrofitting, they should be in probably RH2 because this legislation does not apply to RH1. So basically, they have another existing legal route to add another unit. So basically, again, not many, I guess, or maybe zero single-family units will go through this.
That's a really important point, that if you're a single-family home in an RH2 or RH3 zone, you already have the ability to add another unit because you're under the density limits. Yeah.
No, thank you. That is very helpful. And finally, I'll just say, this is not just limited to Supervisor Wiener's ordinance, but I generally believe that ADUs should be prohibited from short-term rentals, just because I have a lot of concerns about the planning department's ability to enforce a 90-day hosted cap. And so one of my fears is that, these accessory dwelling units will be used as full-time short-term rentals, therefore not, adding to the rental housing stock and easing our housing crisis. But what I will agree with Supervisor Wiener on is that this is not just limited to this ordinance. It should be something that is in place for all ADUs, not just the ones that are being created in this one. But I just wanted to state that I do think that they should be prohibited from short-term rentals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've already taken public comment on this item. And do you have last remarks, Supervisor Wiener?
Sure. So, Madam Chair, if I may, first of all, Supervisor Kim, thank you for the questions. And I would first move to adopt the amendments that we've distributed and that I described at the beginning of the hearing.
Okay, there's a motion to move to adopt the amendments. Without objection, this motion passes.
And
I'm sorry.
Public speakers.
We already had public comment.
We took public comment on item 2, right.
And then I move that we forward item 2 as amended to the full board with positive recommendation.
Okay, there's been a motion to forward. All right, that motion has been seconded by Supervisor Kim. This motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, please call item number 3.
Item number 3 is a resolution approving an agreement to rent units with Raintree 2051 3rd Street LLC for development proposed at 2051 3rd Street.
Great, thank you very much. So, colleagues, on the item of both items 3 and 4, and Madam Clerk, I'm sorry, did you call 3 and 4 together?
Sure. Item number 4 is also a resolution approving an agreement to rent units with AGI TMG Housing Partners 1 for a development proposed at 2001 through 1225 Tennessee Street.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to call items 2 and 3 together. So before us today are 2 developments that have opted to take advantage of a section of our planning code that provides an incentive for developers to construct and maintain rental units in the eastern neighborhoods. These 2 developments in the Dog Patch will together provide 353 units of rental housing. This option in our planning code allows for project sponsors who, in exchange for entering into an agreement with the city, obligating that these units be rental for a period of 30 years, receive a reduction in their impact fees. We have Kate Connor from the Planning Department to present on these 2 items. Kate, would you like to present? Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Kate Connor, Planning Department staff. You have before you a resolution to approve rental incentive agreements, which is an agreement between the property owner and the city to deed restrict new dwelling units for at least 30 years. This agreement is pursuant to Planning Code Section 419.5, and these are for projects located at 2051 3rd Street and 1201 Tennessee Street. 2051 3rd Street is a project which includes the demolition of existing structures on 3 separate lots and the construction of a 6-story building with 93 dwelling units, 74 off-street parking spaces, and 93 bicycle parking spaces. The project includes a dwelling unit mix that contains 33 studios, 22 one-bedroom units, 35 two-bedroom units, and 3 three-bedroom units. All of these units were approved by the Planning Commission unanimously on June the 5th, 2014. 1201 Tennessee Street is a project which includes the demolition of an existing 2-story commercial warehouse, an automotive service building, and the construction of a 6-story building with 259 dwelling units, ground floor retail, and 147 off-street parking spaces and 259 bicycle parking spaces. This project includes a dwelling unit mix consisting of 6 three-bedroom units, 105 two-bedroom units, 49 one-bedroom units, and 99 studio units. All of these units were approved by the Planning Commission unanimously on May the 1st, 2014. Pursuant to Planning Code Section 419, within the UMU zoning district, if the developer enters into an agreement with the city to restrict the units as a rental for at least 30 years, they can reduce their inclusionary housing percentage by 3% and the amount of Eastern Neighborhoods impact fees by $1 per gross square foot. There's only been one other project that has taken advantage of this to date, and that is 2121 3rd Street. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that quick presentation. Colleagues, I just want to also bring to your attention that I have representatives from Raintree and AIG, which are the project sponsors for these development projects. Supervisor Wiener.
That was from before.
Okay, Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. And Kate, I just wanted to appreciate you talking to me a little bit before this item, but I still want to clarify for the public. So when I read this agreement over the weekend, I was a little surprised to learn that during the Eastern Neighborhood process that there was a piece of that plan that allowed developers to reduce their inclusionary obligation in order to incentivize the production of rental housing. And of course, I wasn't around when Eastern Neighborhoods was being planned. And in today's market, it doesn't seem like we need to provide any incentives to have developers build rentals or housing, period. And in fact, if anything, we're not building enough home ownership units. I was hoping you could explain, for the sake of the public, a little bit some of the background behind how this got put in place. And a follow-up question to that is that if this incentive was so important, why did it only cover the UMU versus a wider swath of Eastern Neighborhoods?
Of course. So the Eastern Neighborhoods area was kind of identified within the housing element as a target area for housing. The UMU zoning districts were typically M1 or M2 industrial zoning districts that would not actually permit any housing to be developed. So to kind of counteract the additional land value from being able to permit residential units, there's increased affordability in the UMU districts. So all of the percentages were much higher. But with the increased percentages, there was also some added flexibility as far as how to meet the inclusionary housing requirements. And there are a couple of different alternatives that are out there, including land dedication, middle income, and then also this rental incentive provision. And so this provision, it was adopted with Eastern Neighborhoods in 2008. Also, we've definitely seen an increase in rental housing now. This agreement will restrict it for 30 years. And so that can kind of, it doesn't matter exactly what the market will do. This will maintain the rental housing for a period of 30 years. Does that answer your question?
It does. And because and I'll ask you a follow-up question to that. In today's market, we talk a lot about protecting industrial and PDR because the housing market is so hot right now that, people would prefer to build office and residential where they can. And I'm curious what role that topic played in incentivizing rentals to be built in this industrial area.
I probably can't speak exactly to how the actual lines were drawn for these UMU districts, but these were definitely identified as the industrial districts that would permit for this mixed use and housing uses.
Okay. And a 1% increase in its obligation to build affordable housing was considered a significant increase in relation to kind of the lower cost of land in the UMU?
Right. So, I mean, the UMU has these increased requirements. So I think both of these particular parcels had a 16% requirement.
Right.
And that was even after the Prop C reduction.
Right.
So whereas in many zoning districts within the city, they're looking at a 12% on-site requirement, UMU already has a 16.
Okay.
So by taking advantage of the rental incentive, then it's allowing for that further reduction.
And in relation to eastern neighborhoods, these developments would be eligible for the 20% reduction via the Housing Trust Fund, regardless of whether this particular mechanism existed in eastern neighborhoods plan?
Correct. So, I mean, the 20% reduction was applied to this area and the zoning district.
Thank you. I will be supporting these items today, but, I hope as we relook at eastern neighborhoods, and I think we're hitting the 5-year mark soon, I really want to re-examine this incentive that was put in place in the UMU. It seems very odd, given what we're seeing in the housing market today. Particularly, I think we are producing a ton of rentals. And so, I just want us to be thoughtful about that moving forward. That being said, I recognize that they would be eligible potentially for the 20% reduction via Housing Trust Fund anyway. So we'll be supporting these two items today.
Thank you very much. Let's go to public comment. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on items 3 and 4? Okay, seeing that there is no public comment is closed. Okay, so colleagues, seeing that there's no more discussion on this item, may I please have a motion to send both items 3 and 4 to the full board with a positive recommendation?
So moved.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Weiner motion made by Weiner, seconded by Supervisor Kim, and without objection, this motion passes. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 5?
Item number 5 is a resolution authorizing a lease and facilities agreement between the city and the Mexican Museum for base rate of $1.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this item was sponsored by Mayor Lee and Supervisor Kim, Campos, and Weiner. Supervisor Kim and Weiner, do you have any opening remarks? Oh, Supervisor Kim has opening remarks. Please.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I'm proud to join the mayor and Supervisor Weiner and Campos today in sponsoring the resolution that authorizes finally the lease agreement between the city and the Mexican Museum. This has really been a project that has a ton of history and has gone through and overcome many challenges and obstacles. But I just want to congratulate the parties that were involved in making this a reality. This was a long-awaited promise of that redevelopment area plan to bring the Mexican Museum to a part of the city where we have the Museum of Modern Art, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, the Museum of African Diaspora, and the Jewish Contemporary Museum. The lease agreement authorizes the Mexican Museum to lease from the city and county of San Francisco approximately 48,000 square feet at the 706 Mission Project for a 66-year term for $1. The agreement also includes an option to extend for another 33 years. The Mexican Museum is a one-of-a-kind institution that will showcase the complexity and the richness of the Latino arts throughout the America, and I just want to recognize again OCII, Department of Real Estate, Millennium Partners, and countless community stakeholders that have helped to make sure that this vision will become realized and to have a world-class museum here in this neighborhood. And I also want to appreciate the museum doing outreach to some of our youth programs in the neighborhood to really make sure that we are going to reach a diverse cross-section of audience members.
Thank you very much. So the next person I'm going to call up to speak is John Updike. He will make a short presentation, and then we will also ask Victor Marquez, who's the General Counsel of the museum, to follow in the presentation. Andy Kluger, who is the board chair, and Cayetana Gomez, who's the CEO and president of the museum, will also speak today. Mr. Updike, thank you for being here. Please continue.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. John Updike, Director of Real Estate. So this item, as the supervisor mentioned, is a resolution authorizing the city to enter into a long-term lease with the Mexican Museum, which is a nonprofit public benefit corporation, within the development that we all know as 706 Mission Street at Mission and 3rd. The map here. And that depicts the essentially the premises around the Arison building. So while the museum has a history of over 4 decades and is currently located at Fort Mason, this particular project has roots back over 20 years ago when the former redevelopment agency went on record supporting a permanent home for the Mexican Museum. Now that day, as Supervisor Kim mentioned, has finally arrived. Legislatively, at least. We still have a little bit of work to do before we cut the ribbon, but we're looking forward to that. This public-private partnership is between the city, the museum, OCII, and the developer Millennium Partners. Millennium intends to develop the site in accordance with their agreement with OCII and consistent with their entitlements. They will construct and convey to the city a condominium interest in approximately 48,000 square feet of core and shell space across 4 floors of the development and lower-level storage, including the historic Arison building, all below the residential development above. Just to give you a sense of the massing of the project, this depicts that development within the existing Arison, the new construction, and the residential in blue above on the map. The space will be built to specifications now in a collaborative design process. Tenant improvements from pre-development through construction will be facilitated through more than $10 million in grant funds provided by OCII, and there is a separate grant agreement from 2010 that covers the terms of that grant. This, as Supervisor Kim mentioned, is a 66-year lease with a 33-year option for renewal. The museum would be responsible for all tenant improvements, maintenance and repair costs, and all operating costs. There is no anticipated city expense associated with this agreement. There is a robust review and consultation of plans and specifications for the build-out. Those are embedded in the lease, and further reporting requirements throughout the term of the lease to ensure the public's enjoyment of what will be a world-class museum. Built and managed to American Alliance of Museums and Association of Art Museum Directors standards. Operating reserve requirements start at the 6-month operating reserve on opening day, graduating to 12 months by year 5 of the operation. An initial security deposit of $500,000 is required at opening, increasing to $2 million by year 5. I want to thank staff at OCII, the Arts Commission staff, City Attorney's Office, a number of them assisted us with this. Josh Keene of my staff who's here today, Sean Jeffries of Millennium Partners and his team, Victor Marquez, Board Chair Andy Kluger, and of course the rest of the board and staff at the Mexican Museum for getting us to this point today and following more than a year of negotiations. So next I'd like to introduce Victor Marquez, General Counsel to the museum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mark. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Chairwoman Cohen, Supervisors Kim and Weiner, this is truly a historic day. My name is Victor Marquez, and I am the General Counsel of the Mexican Museum. With me today are members of the Executive Committee of the Mexican Museum who are appearing before you to give you a couple of brief updates on the incredible successes of the Mexican Museum. As you mentioned already, Chair Cohen, Andrew Kluger, our board chair, and President and CEO Cayetana Gomez will be speaking as part of my presentation, and then during public comment, we will be hearing from Board Secretary Miguel Bustos and co-chair of the Building Committee, Alfredo Pedrosa, and there are 2 community members who were invited to speak out of dozens who wanted to be here and speak, and they will be coming next week to observe the final vote. As General Counsel, I was honored to lead the negotiations on behalf of the Mexican Museum for the long-term lease, which is before you today for approval and to be moved to the full board. The combined 99-year lease is extremely well thought out, and we worked on it for over a year. Part of our negotiations team included the folks that are in this room to speak on behalf of the museum today, as well as Olga Milan-Howells and David De La Torre for the Mexican Museum. On behalf of our team, I want to take a moment to thank the members of the negotiating team who represented the city, starting with John Updike, who just spoke, Tom DeCaney and Rebecca Krell from the Arts Commission, Tiffany Bohe and Christine Maher from the successor agency to the former redevelopment agency, and two very capable and distinguished legal counsel for the city, Heidi Keweretz and Adine Vara, who is now general counsel for the MoMA Museum. Thank you to each and every one of them, and in particular to John, who was truly responsive and supportive every step of the way. Also, a big thank you to the museum's development partners, Sean Jeffries and Mark Farrar, and also Christina Moore, who represented Millennium Partners throughout the process. Together, the negotiated team spent countless hours putting together what is truly an amazing document that will enable the Mexican Museum to finally have a new home at the Yerba Buena Gardens Arts District. Last but not least, I want to thank Supervisor Kim and her office, and in particular April, for all their hard work and support that her office has provided over the past year, not just on this particular piece of legislation, but on the overall development project to help the Mexican Museum's dream a reality. In closing, I want to thank all of you for your vote today in support of the resolution that is before you, and ask that you please move the item to the full board for approval with unanimity. I'll be available to answer any substantive questions, and now it's my pleasure to bring up to the podium Chairman Kluger. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Chairman.
You'll get sick and tired of seeing me after all the hearings we've gone through together. So I want to thank you, both Chairwoman Cohen, Supervisors Kim and Wiener. I thank you very, very much. As you know, I'm Andrew Kluger. I'm the chairman of the board of the Mexican Museum. I'm also pleased to inform you that I'm one of 5 honorary consul generals of Mexico in the United States, and therefore I'm also delighted to speak and represent the government of Mexico at this hearing. I'm delighted to appear before you today to thank the City and County of San Francisco, its agencies, departments for collectively working with our team to develop the comprehensive lease agreement that is before you today and for approval. It's been a long time coming, and I appreciate all of your efforts. Today is truly a historic moment for the city, the Latino community, and all the residents of the city as a whole, and of course, the Republic of Mexico. The lease you're about to approve will not only effectively cement the arts culture ties of Mexico and Latin America with San Francisco, but will also be a gateway for the arts and cultural activities from the Americas, our local Mexican, American, Latino, and Chicano artist communities, to the United States and the world as a Yerba Buena Gardens, as an art mecca for visitors from around the world and the students and faculties of educational institutions in the Bay Area. As trustees and staff of the museum, we take our job extremely serious, and today I have had with me a representative group of the museum's leadership, who I'm eternally indebted for all their work, and ensure the delivery of a world-class museum will be done for the city and county of San Francisco, the people of this city and the Bay Area, right here in the city in the next 3 years. We further thank the city for being an amazing partner with our board of trustees and staff, and jointly working to develop what we consider to be a crowning jewel to the city's cultural assets. For that, I thank John Updike very, very much for all the work he's done. I want to also thank Millennium Partners, and in particular Sean Jeffries and Christina Moore, for being truly supportive and an amazing development partner. As chairman for the past 2 years, going into my 3rd year, I want to attest to the leaps and bounds that we've measurably attained in the outcomes and achieved both organizationally and with the new building project, of which you will hear from my colleagues in just a couple of minutes. In closing, I want to also share with you 2 significant accomplishments to date. One is the naming of the Nelson Rockefeller Gallery by and through his daughter, Ann Rockefeller Roberts, who is a trustee of our board. The gallery will house a portion of Nelson's popular art collection from Mexico. Ms. Roberts has pledged to raise and has also now provided funds for $3 million for that gallery. In addition, I'm pleased to report the naming of the Diego Rivera Gallery by and through his daughter, Guadalupe, and the Rivera Foundation, who are also taking part in the museum's International Advisory Board. Ms. Marin Rivera similarly has pledged to raise the $3 million for that gallery in honor of her late father, Master Painter Diego Rivera. Thank you again for your time, for your favorable moving the approval of this motion for the museum for long-term lease. And again, thank you for all the times you've had to see me testify. And thank you also for your support, and especially Supervisor Kim for being in that district and pushing for us. Thank you both. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Cohen, Supervisor Kim, and Weiner. My name is Cayetana Shkurovich Gomez, and I'm the President and CEO of the Mexican Museum. I am delighted to appear before you and take the opportunity to thank you for your support of the resolution to approve the Mexican Museum long-term lease at the Yerba Buena Gardens Art District. At the staff level, we have been able to catalog the museum world-class permanent collection of over 16,000 objects of art, reflecting pre-Hispanic, colonial, popular, modern and contemporary Mexican, Mexican-American, Latin American, Latino, and Chicano art. We have, in effect, been working to get the collection ready to move to its new home at Yerba Buena. With approval of the lease, we will be on our way of realizing the museum supporters' long-term dream of building a permanent home worthy of our institution's collections. We look forward to forging true working partnerships with the San Francisco Arts Commission and our sister organization at Yerba Buena, which include the Contemporary Jewish Museum, the Museum of African Diaspora, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and the MoMA. In addition, I want to highlight that as the only Smithsonian Institution museum in San Francisco, we will be undertaking some truly exciting joint programming, both here in San Francisco and in the country's capital. And we are working to forge partnerships with institutions in Mexico for truly exciting programming, as well as high-level sponsorships for our capital and endowment campaigns, and to help realize some amazing travel exhibitions that we believe will be record-breaking exhibitions at the Yerba Buena Gardens Art District. Thank you so much for your support today and for moving the lease for approval to the full board.
Thank you very much. Let's see, I think at this point we are going to move into public comment. And first up will be Miguel Bustos, Alfredo Pedrosa, and Roberto Hernandez, Sam Ruiz, and Gloria Romero.
Buenos días. Good afternoon.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Thank
Chairman Cohen, Supervisors Weiner, and Supervisors Kin. My name is Miguel Bustos, and I'm delighted to be here as Secretary of the Board of Trustees for the Mexican Museum. As a native San Franciscan and a lifelong resident of the Mission District where this museum was founded, it is an honor to be here today after a long period of work and a lot of work from many levels, from many different groups, but we're here today. And we're also here to show gratitude for the city believing in us, believing in our community, but how wonderful it is to have a museum, of all places in San Francisco, in a land that once was part of Mexico. So this continues that continuum of expression of our culture and of our people. The community has been looking forward to this day for a long time, and the actions today will only move our project, our dreams of a community forward. And this museum was founded by a wonderful artist, a wonderful community member, Peter Rodriguez, in 1975. And that realization of his dreams will become a reality with your vote today. Today, the museum's vision has expanded beyond what was once a gallery to now full scope of Mexican, Chicano, Latino experiences through arts history and heritage programs. We have family Sundays, we have exhibitions, we have special events, lectures, as well as programming throughout the Bay Area. So we look forward to permanently putting together our community's cultural experiences and richness at Yerba Buena. We're delighted to work with the partnership with the city, and we look forward to a healthy and strong relationship with all of you. This sets the stage for us and for a new century of true and meaningful collaboration. We thank you for your favorable approval of this lease. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Cohen, Supervisors Kim and Wiener. My name is Alfredo Pedrosa, co-chair of the Building Committee for the Mexican Museum, along with my colleague Olga Milan Howells. Like my colleague Miguel Bustos, I am also a native of San Francisco and a lifelong resident of the Mission District. Thank you so much to each of you for your strong and unwavering support of the Mexican Museum and all of our efforts to build a new and permanent home for the Mexican Museum, soon to be at the Yerba Buena Gardens Art District. The approval of our long-term lease marks an important historical milestone for our institution. This milestone, coupled with the work that we are undertaking through the Building Committee, will result in the delivery of a world-class, world-renowned new asset for the city and county of San Francisco for our local, national, and international communities. The decades-long effort of so many from the local community and local government will soon culminate in the construction of a truly beautiful Mexican museum that we can all be proud of. I am pleased to report that we have officially completed the conceptual design for the new museum building. We look forward to sharing the designs with you and your colleagues in the very near future. I would like to thank members of our building committee and recognize our design architect Enrique Norton and TEN Arquitectos, a Mexican architectural firm, as well as the local architects of records comprised of Sandra Vivanco of A&D Architecture and Peter Fau of Fau Long. Together, we have been hard at work to complete the conceptual designs, and we are now moving into the schematic design phase for the new building. I also want to recognize the excellent partnership we have with Millennium Partners, our development partner, and who are building the base of the 706 Mission Street Residential and Mexican Museum project. I am pleased to report that we will be breaking ground and construction is set to be. The core and shell of the Mexican Museum will be turned over to us in 2017, and we will undertake the tenant improvements at that time with the project opening of the Mexican Museum in 2018. We want to invite each of you to join us at the groundbreaking this summer. Thank you so much for all of your support, and we look forward to the passage of this.
Thank you very much. Roberto Hernandez, Sam Ruiz, and Gloria Romero. Okay, Gloria.
Hello, buenas tardes, Chairwoman Cohen, Supervisors Kim and Wiener. My name is Gloria Romero, and I am also a native San Franciscan. And as the Youth Services Director for Mission Neighborhood Centers, I'm here today representing our agency and our Executive Director, Sam Reese, who couldn't be here today. I will read the following statement on his behalf. MNC serves over 3,000 youth, seniors, and families in the Mission District annually. Our organization has been providing these services for over 50 years. I'm here today before you as a representative of the Mission District to express our unequivocal and strong support for the Mexican Museum and ask that you approve the long-term lease that is before you for consideration. The dream to build a new home for the Mexican Museum at the Yerba Buena Gardens Arts District is something that we in the community have been waiting to be realized for over 20 years. This is truly important to our community because it will help build the image and self-esteem of our community from young children to senior citizens who will have a place to call their own when they go to downtown San Francisco. We thank the Board of Trustees and staff of the Mexican Museum for all of their hard work and dedication at keeping the dream alive and at making the new Mexican Museum's home a reality. And we also thank the City and County of San Francisco for supporting our dream and helping to build that dream into reality. Thank you.
Very much. Next speaker.
Buenas tardes, my name is Roberto Hernandez, and I just want to say muchas gracias. If you look up, you see all that architectural design? Somebody had a dream to build this building and it got built. You know how long it took? Google it. But the Mexican Museum is taking us 20 years. Can you imagine that? 20 years to finally get it built. And this is a very special day. Another hearing, another meeting. Hopefully these are going to end and you won't hear from us again until the grand opening. Muchas gracias.
All right. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed for item number 5. I'd just like to say to the representatives of the Mexican Museum, it's been a joy to sit on this board and listen to the presentation over and over and over again. And every time you listen to it, you get a little bit more excited. I'm happy to add my name as a co-sponsor to this legislation, and you have my full support. Thank you. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. It's great to see the community back. I semi-enjoy seeing you at Chamber anyway because we get to see one another, but I know that this has been a long process for everyone and the community, and so thank you for your endurance and patience as well. When it finally opens, it will be well-deserved and really a beautiful and important contribution to the city. And I also want to thank the group for recognizing April Veneracion. I often don't take enough time to recognize our staff, but members in the community know that our staff actually do the real work. We get to just take accolades for their work, but she did do a considerable amount for this development deal to move forward, and I know that she really enjoyed working with this community to make the Mexican Museum a reality. So I'd like to move this forward with a positive recommendation to the full board.
All right, a motion has been made by Supervisor Kim and seconded by Supervisor Weiner. This motion passes. Motion for a positive recommendation to the full board. We are one step closer. Madam Clerk, are there any other items before us today?
There's no further business.
All right, thank you. There's no further business now. This meeting is adjourned.